Good morning. God morgon. Hyvää huomenta. So nice to be here with you. And as Knut said, it's kind of emotional being with other people. It's a bit different talking to three-dimensional people than through Zoom. I'm going to be talking today about what people in our cities need and some ideas on what could be the role of libraries in all of that. I'm not going to tell you how to run your libraries. You're better in that. But I'm going to suggest a few themes that I think would be relevant for people in our cities. But I want to thank first Knut, Merete, Selma, and the entire team for having us in this building and sharing the wonder of this building with all of us and your tremendous hospitality. I don't take this meeting very lightly. I'm very eager to learn from all of you over the next couple of days. But also come to this meeting with a sense of humility towards what you've all gone through over the last couple of years. Closing, opening, making the case for libraries. But also towards all the small miracles and big miracles that happen in libraries every day. Some of them are seen by librarians, many are not. And I just wanted to start by sharing one of them, which is mine. I come from a small town outside Helsinki, 45 minutes away. I mean, calling it a town is an exaggeration. It's called Nummela. And I was as a teenager and child, I was very active. I had a lot going on in my head. I was active in Scouts, did fairly well in school, wanted to get things right. But then when I reached puberty, I kind of sensed that there was something that was slightly different in me compared to most of the people in my class. And I think it was the fact that I was fairly certain at that point that I was gay. And the library in Nummela was on the same street where we live. And in the magazine hall, you had this was before internet, you had the LGBT magazine, the Finnish one. And it was visible there in the magazine hall. And I probably went there 4 or 5 times before I actually had the audacity or the boldness, courage to take it and open it. And even then, I took the next magazine and I put it inside the current affairs magazine, which was kind of, if you know American media, Newsweek. And then I had carefully selected a kind of a nook in the library where I could sit so that no one can see what I'm reading. And probably no one at the library knows that this was going on. But it changed who I am. It kind of showed me, to quote West Side Story, that there's a place for us, that there's other people who are like me. It made me move to a city, and it makes me very passionate about libraries and in many ways making cities work for people. That's where I start. I come to this after spending the last decade in a sort of an inside-outside role when it comes to libraries. I'm not a librarian, so there's a bit of an imposter syndrome here. I worked with new forms of democracy for a think tank in Finland for a long time. I had, as I said, been active in the Scouts, and then Helsinki was looking for a new youth director, run youth clubs, young people civic engagement, helping young people at risk. And I had a few friends who said, you should apply. And I applied, and after a very lengthy process, I was elected to that role. And even at that time, Helsinki had the strategy that branch libraries were created often together with youth clubs. And then 4 years into that role, the city council decided that 31 departments in a city was too difficult to coordinate, that the departments were just doing their own thing. That probably doesn't happen in other cities. And things were falling between departments. They were all blaming each other. So in a very kind of Finnish way, went from 31 departments to 4. And I was then had the privilege to be elected to lead one of them. The mayor called it the director of fun. Executive director for culture and leisure was the formal way of describing the role, which meant that we brought 7 former departments under same management. So that was arts and culture, sports, youth, and the public library system. And 5 years into that role, I got a call from an American foundation called Bloomberg Philanthropies. It's one of the biggest foundations in the world that works with cities, making cities better. And they told me that they are setting this new center at Johns Hopkins University, which is one of America's best research universities, to build a center that bridges the worlds of practice in cities and the world of academic research. And they said one of the programs that they are thinking of setting up is this fellowship for public sector leaders. And literally they asked me, would you be willing to be the guinea pig for this program? To have 2 years to think, to reflect on what you've learned about public service and develop new thinking around public service. Even if I loved my job in Helsinki, it didn't take me very long to say yes. I've met so many public sector leaders over the last couple of months, and many say that if I would have 2 hours to think, that would be a lot already. And what we basically do is that we work with cities around the world in pushing for better public services, pushing for public innovation, and pushing things that really also, innovation that builds trust in government. And we are currently working with around 30 cities around the world. I'm at the moment the only public innovation fellow in the center, but we are very close to announcing another one. So we work mostly, the strongest presence is in North America, some in Latin America, and some in Europe, but this map is growing already. So this is kind of the context where I come from into this discussion. So the last couple of months, I've been focusing on what I would want to focus on, defining a research question. And I must say that doing research uses a different part of your brain than managing a department. They're both very demanding jobs. And I'm at the point of sending my research proposal for ethical review at the university. And I can already tell you that the word public libraries, or the phrase public libraries, is central to my research for the next couple of years. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about what makes cities work, and this is my clearest picture of what is an urban experience. This builds very strongly on work by a German sociologist called Georg Simmel from the 1800s, and his essay, which is called Metropolis and the Human Spirit. And I think it's important that we go back in history and not claim to discover something that has been discovered before. At least track our thinking back to the original source. And what Simmel writes, and at least resonates very strongly with me, is that what makes cities flourish is the fact that they are concentrations of people. You have a lot of different people living next to each other. And in cities, we can focus on doing things. We don't have to. Someone else produces food, and then we can focus on working at a library or school or running our business. So the specialization in cities, the fact that we are able to specialize on something, that we are not self-reliant, allows innovation, creativity, all the good stuff. But at the same time, we are more and more dependent on other people to meet our basic needs. We need someone to drive us to work. For instance, drive the subway to take us to work. We need someone to keep the lights on at the store and make sure that there's stuff on the shelves. Or we need someone to take care of our kids during the day and teach them so that we can be at work. And the complexity of cities is so high that it's absolutely impossible for people to actually understand how I relate to other people, how my actions or inactions affect other people, and how they affect us. And this is mentally quite tough on people. And it challenges our sense of like holding on to a sense of self. And I know this now, moving to a city where I don't know anyone, like where you don't understand the codes at all. And it's the cognitive overload of understanding of who you can trust, who can help you, where do you do your daily errands is incredibly tough. And there's also like, and then you put on top of this, you put climate change, the Ukraine war, the racial equity challenges that we have in our many of our cities, gun violence in a lot of American cities like we've witnessed lately. And there's also a generational aspect of this. And I think it was beautifully put in a book lately by an American novelist, Jenny Offel, in a book of hers that's called Weather, which is about a librarian. It's about a librarian who climate change, biodiversity, wars, technology, privacy, the state of your marriage, the careers of your kids all get tangled up into this mess inside your head that you're actually not able to move forward anymore. And she describes beautifully that there's also a generational aspect of this. This Lizzie, this librarian, notices this when she looks at people, that she says, young person worry is, what if nothing I do matters? What if it's beyond repair? And then an old person worry is, what if everything I do does? If I'm guilty for all of this. And both of these are actually quite paralyzing emotions in us. They make us like freeze, a lot of us. And what Georg Simmel writes in his essay is that there's two very common strategies, kind of psychological strategies that people deal with this urban complexity. One of them is that we refrain from public life. We're like, I'm just going to do I was about to say a rude word, but my stuff. I'm going to focus on my home, my family. I'm not going to care about other people. I'm going to just do my work well. That's enough. I want to make sure that I can get to work with my car very easily and back. I want a controllable environment when everything seems to be in motion. This is why we love talking about sofa pillows, because that's something that we can control. But it leads to massive challenges for a democratic society. If everything around that small controllable universe turns into a threat for us. The other psychological strategy that can be identified, and this is in the 1800s, we have so much more tools for this now, is that we just start shouting our needs louder. We think that we are in competition with other people, and we need to be louder, because it's a competition. And we have so much more tools for that, which creates this chaos, like even feeds into that chaos. This is kind of where I start my research. It's not the most hopeful place, but I think there's places to go here, and I think a lot of potential also for libraries. So my research for the next couple of years will focus on how we make cities better together, easily. So partnerships. And especially, I'm going to be looking at how this thing called social infrastructure, as in places where we meet other people, parks, trails, public libraries, how do you build partnerships around them? How people feel welcome into these spaces and inclined to come into these spaces, even when we have so many incentives at the moment to stay home, take distance to other people, claim territory for ourselves. And I'm going to be looking at how we can make cities better and make libraries and parks better by building partnerships with business, with philanthropies, with civil society, with universities. That's simply what I'm going to focus on. And I'm going to do this by focusing on 5 cities, some from the United States and some from Europe, and looking at 2 dimensions on these partnerships. So is the local government the one that brings organizations to the table? Or is it a third party that kind of the city joins the activities run by others or initiated by others? And then the other dimension that I'll be looking at is what's the motivation to work together? Is it that we don't have enough money to do the things that we either need or want to do? Or is it that the challenges that we face are so complex that we don't have the legitimacy, the skills, the needs to, skills or the authority to actually do all of that? And I'm really going to be focusing on what needs to happen inside local government. Not listing wonderful examples from around the world, but really looking at how bureaucracies should function. I know that based on the couple of discussions that we've had over the last night and even this morning, that you all face challenges when it comes to fundraising, when it comes to procurement, when it comes to convincing the financial department in the city that this is not a waste of money. We know that in most cities, it's easier to build something new than to have money to maintain the existing infrastructure, because our budgetary systems cause that. So really looking at how cities should function so that these spaces that really make cities alive, parks and public libraries, could function better. And I think there's a sense of urgency around this issue. Italian theorist Ezio Manzini, who is one of the biggest thinkers on social innovation, has said beautifully in his new book that there's kind of a battle between two ideas of a good city. The other one is this, what he calls everything from or everything at home. It's the controllable universes next to each other idea, which has been enhanced by technology and by COVID. This idea that I have my bubble here and then things are delivered to my door. But this is both an ecological disaster and this is also a social disaster. Because it also creates, if we look at where our labor market is developing in cities at the moment, that we have people like me, I'm not making assumptions on you, but people like me, our life has gotten super convenient in most cities, at least in Europe and the US. We can have stuff delivered in a few hours to us. And we can put the washing machine on in the middle of the day and like sort our laundry and do all that stuff. Kind of nice. But then the other part of the story, the other part of the labor market is that the other people are forced to meet our trivial needs when we want to. And we have so many tools nowadays to control their work. Whereas like I can do my laundry in the middle of the day and my boss doesn't know or care. Whereas if you work in customer service or delivery at the moment, they can control you. They can know up to a second where you are, how long do you spend at the door, did you stop to have a coffee? And if we think of building a social contract in this world, I think it's close to impossible. When we're forcing people more and more into this role of servitude, they're serving our needs, serving the better people, basically. The other world that Manzini talks about and advocates for, and I would also advocate for, is what he calls livable proximity. This is what, for instance, if you look at cities like Barcelona or Paris or even Helsinki, you talk about the 15-minute city. The thing that you have jobs and homes next to each other, it's a livable, nice environment, investment in public space, but it doesn't happen by itself. We have a lot of incentives against this model of cities. And I think it's really critical that we position libraries right in this development. When I've been doing reading around this issue, I've fallen in love with this word called conviviality. And going back to what Knut said earlier about we make things slightly too complicated sometimes when we try to advocate for libraries. I learned this word only a couple of months ago because I'm not a native English speaker. So conviviality is very simple. The quality of being friendly and making people feel happy and welcome. And I would claim that this is fundamental for a democratic city and for this idea that we can live together with other people. And it's the main contribution to democracy done by public libraries and parks. Sorry, I was standing in front of. And you can get all these slides if you want to. And And really, I think there's a lot to do in explaining how important this is and how it works. And what are the daily practices that librarians are doing to make sure that everyone feels welcome, everyone feels happy, and friendly doesn't happen by itself. And why I'm interested in parks and libraries, I think there's a lot of commonalities there. There's this beautiful research that comes out from Leeds, the reference is here, where they did research on parks. But I think if you would change the word parks to libraries in this, there would be a lot of similarities. Parks are places in which people are open to encounter difference, but are largely semi-liminal places of escape and recreation, not necessarily places to expect the discussion of or airing of differing opinions. It doesn't mean that these discussions or debates can't happen, but if you go to a library and you're thinking of reading a book and they force you into a discussion about the future of democracy, I don't think you're gonna get the happy face. And they continue to tie parks too closely to achieving such deliberative outcomes. Deliberative means negotiation, as in negotiating democracy. Even only as the ideals, risks overextending their actual social value and masking their potential role in fostering sociality. And I think the risk is that if we overpromise on the democratic potential without really explaining what's the magic that happens in libraries every day, we might destroy what actually makes them popular. I'm not saying that don't do debates, but to be sensitive to the fact that people should have the right always to choose whether they join something or not. And I think there's, even in park, if you go there to have a picnic with your friends who you haven't seen for a year and the city has decided to turn the park into a citizen engagement practice, I would run the other way immediately. But this is not easy. Making people feel happy and welcome in a diverse society doesn't happen by itself. And the former picture was from Chicago, and Chicago continues. There's one thinker who's influenced my thinking around this more than anyone else is this professor of philosophy from the University of Chicago called Martha Nussbaum. And she and the Nobel-winning economist Amartya Sen have developed this thing that's called the capabilities approach. Basically, the idea is that the society's focus should be creating capabilities for people to live a life they have reason to value, but not tell them what the choices actually in the end are. And the idea that your freedom ends when it starts limiting other people's freedoms, and that every single person has an intrinsic value, so averages don't take us far. So sometimes we might need to limit someone else's capability to get certain people at least to the minimum level. Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum developed this thinking. Most of the research work was done in India and regarding women's rights in India. And I think there's a lot of things that speak to the world that we live in today. The simple question that she's asking, what are people actually able to be and do? So just providing opportunities is not enough if people don't, for instance, feel welcome. If they risk retaliation or violence from their family by joining an event, it's not a real opportunity then. And Nussbaum goes even further by listing the 10 capabilities that every single person should have, while emphasizing that the level of this capability is a democratic decision dependent on the resources in every single society. And it should be democratically decided. But these are the capabilities that every person should have, according to her thinking. They're very simple. Life, meaning being able to live a life of normal length. Bodily health is being able to live a healthy life and to get help and assistance when you need it. Bodily integrity means being able to move freely in a city without harassment and fear. Senses, imagination, and thought means being able to explore new ideas and new worlds. Emotions means having the capability to feel different things without shame and fear and retaliation and violence. for instance, love. Practical reason means being able to, having the capability to form the conception of right and wrong. For instance, here, education plays a fundamental role. Affiliation means having the capability to attach to other people, to build meaningful relationships with other people, and to detach from those relationships without risk of violence, retaliation, shame, and death. Other species means living in harmony with other species and the world of nature. Play means having the capabilities for recreation and play, enjoyment, and fun. And control over one's environment means being able to influence the future of your community, as in voting, and being able to own property. And I think it's fairly simple. And what she says is that societies need to be very good in welcoming people in and removing barriers. But if I want to stay home, even if there's a great debate going on at the library, and I just want to stay home with my family and watch Netflix, that's okay. I shouldn't be shamed for that. Or that every single person doesn't need to join the town hall organized by the mayor to be a good person. But you should have the capability for that, which means that there should be childcare, there should be translation, it should be organized at a time that you can actually make it. I think the key issues, if we go back to the complexity picture, our graphic designer was overwhelmed with my picture and decided not to start drawing it again. I think the essential skills where I think libraries can play a really fundamental role in our cities nowadays are this having a sense of self, having a story of who I am. With all this noisy mess that's happening around it, it's very easy to lose yourself. And actually becoming defined by other people rather than having your own story. The other thing I think is being able to stay open to other people, living with others, that conviviality. It doesn't mean that we have to become friends, but I need to respect you and that you have the same right to share space than I do. And then hope. And I think hope is a skill that can be built through experiences where you feel like you're being recognized and your presence and your opinions are recognized and you feel like you have value to other people. I think hope is an active state. It's not just a feeling. And I would advocate that when we think about building stronger communities, striving for getting along would be a great achievement if we compare it to where a lot of our communities at the moment are. The fact that that we all would be able to move around in our community without fear and prejudice. I know in my community at the moment there's this neighborhood social network called Nextdoor. And when people are posting pictures of suspicious people in our neighborhood, they're never white. So just getting to the level of being able to breathe freely and move around the city without fear, I think would be a tremendous achievement already. And I think here libraries can really play a big role. I don't think we should strive for harmonious villages where we all hold hands and in a way, just like, that's why, for instance, I wouldn't move to a city. As a gay man, that's not my ideal world. I also wouldn't strive for keeping the evil out, as in building very strong communities, but making sure that the external borders are very, very strong. And this is, for instance, the difference between nation states and cities. Cities can still be open. You can feel like you're from Oslo from day one. Whereas you probably can't feel like you're Norwegian from day one, or American. And Ezio Mancini speaks beautifully about these project-based communities, as in understanding that we have joint aspirations with other people. Some are temporary, some are really long-lasting, some are lifelong. But we should see the neighborhood or the local community as overlapping project communities, as in we work on something to take something further, providing help, taking care of the community garden, or as my husband is doing, an Easter, wreath on the door there in the picture. He would hate it if I told him that this is here. So I think cities, when we think about the communities and the whole discussion about how things were better before, I don't think they were. They were better for some people. We shouldn't strive, when we think of urban communities, we shouldn't strive for this village idea. Villages are different than cities. But cities are also not merely like collections of individuals. They are these communities that overlap, and we should make sure that everyone feels a sense of belonging to at least a few of them. And we need I think the role of parks and libraries, for instance, is both in supporting our strong ties, as in our friendships and our family, being able to go with your kids to the library, having a picnic at the park with your loved ones or your friends, but they should also foster these weak ties, as in people you might not know their name, but you kind of know that they live in your neighborhood. Or you might know their first name. You might have their phone number even if you never use it. And kind of this idea of sharing space with other people. And I think understanding that in cities, we need both. People want to use this building both with their loved ones, but they also want to come here and see lives that are different than their own. And in a way, to create that sense of friendliness around that is, I think, the major contribution that libraries and parks make to democracy. To close off, I want to highlight a few opportunities that I see, especially for public libraries, in helping people with this mess that I actually love, the fact that cities are messy and noisy and like you can't really make sense of them and surprising things happen, which are helping people to be a somebody, fostering collective intelligence, creating spaces for play and imagination, being proudly an institution, and then building on freedom. And I'll go through these quickly. The first one is, how are libraries places where people can go from a nobody or an anybody to a somebody? How can we be more intentional about that? That the activity, we were talking about this yesterday, about intentional action in the programming. For instance, how can book clubs be places where you can get more tools to building that story of who you are? And in a way, providing tools for this narrative about yourself that's driven by you. It's not an egoistic, we all need that. And I think that this is also the sense of self. Being a somebody is something where the classical resource of libraries, as in books, plays a huge role. I think there's a huge desire for this, that we get more tools in creating that story of who we are. The other part is the future of local democracy, and especially participatory democracy. How can libraries be places where we can, even from a day one in a community, we can make sense of what this community is, where does it come from, and what possible futures does it have? How can the data about, how can library be a place where I can see my own action compared to other people? And for instance, partnerships with both data science and arts could really take this to the next level. And in a way, making those visible, those communities in our communities visible in the library. And I think this is the way also to providing that resource and kind of not forcing people into it, but inviting people in to explore their behavior and their dreams compared to other people. There's also a lot of museum initiatives going on around this, like building these museums of tomorrow and so on. But I think every community needs that place where you can, next to that story of me, as in what's my sense of self, you can also see yourself in the story of we, as in who we are from day one joining a community. The third thing, this is the one that I'm most passionate about, is the role of play and imagination. There was this wonderful discussion that I had with Eva Mitnick from Los Angeles Public Library. She said, we decided to start a program around what would people want to do in a library. And asking, rather than asking what do they need, and I think that's an important question, but also asking what would people actually want to do, or to even more simply, what would be fun? And she said in the discussion, I hope it's okay to disclose this, I see John nodding, that the overwhelming response from the staff saying, I want to be involved in this. And I think especially now after COVID and the exhausting 2 years, to really kind of open horizons to joy. There's also like a lot of recent public health research would support this. People don't always need to do changes in their health and actions for the so-called right reasons, through a rational thinking. There's this one research that I was reading about, especially adults and physical activity programs, that said the sense of enjoyment from day one is actually a stronger predictor of sustained behavior change, as in whether it lasts, whether you actually keep being active, than whether you're able to do it. Because people like to do what they like to do. It's sort of simple. But I think our world is so rational that I think we would need those places in cities that where adults can also do role play and fun and like enjoyment. And let's make sure, I would love to work with you if you want on taking this further. And I think there's massive possibilities for partnerships in this. The fourth one is being an institution, solidly being an institution, and especially the underserved and the people who have struggles in their lives need stability. Everything cannot be changing all the time. And going back to the Nussbaum idea, these researchers, Jonathan Wolfe and Avner Deschalit, write that especially for the most vulnerable people in our community, a sense of stability is essential. That we are here for the long run. And I think there's so much talk around city development about pop-ups and what have you. And I think pop-ups are important, but that the libraries would boldly be an institution. Like, we are here for you, like in good times and bad times. As Hannah Arendt says beautifully, if the world is to contain a public space, it cannot be erected only for one generation and planned for the living only. It must transcend the lifespan of mortal men. And finally, I go back to Nussbaum, building on freedom. Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum were the ones who worked on this capability approach together. And Amartya Sen says, a good life is a life one has reason to value, as in there's agency and there's choice. That you can build a life of yourself, and then making sure that you're holding on to this right to self-determination. I would go as far as saying the right to self-determination would be, in my thinking, the non-negotiable core of libraries. That you have the right to choose what you engage in and who you are. There's so many places in our cities nowadays where someone else defines who you are, what you're interested in. Are you valuable or are you not valuable? So really building on that freedom and being vocal about it in a friendly and kind manner. I close off with another thinker from Chicago. Saul Alinsky is one of the biggest names in American community organizing, especially around the housing crisis in Chicago. He mobilized people to push for change in social housing in Chicago. And I want to go back to, I started saying that I come to this meeting with a sense of humility. And I think we need the right combination of humility and ambition. He says, it is difficult for people to believe that you really respect their dignity. After all, they know very few people, including their own neighbors, who do. But it's equally difficult for you to surrender that little image of God created in your own likeness, which lurks in all of us and tells us that we secretly believe that we know what's best for the people. I think that's the challenge on being useful, valuable members of the community, but not thinking that we actually know better than the people in our communities what they need. Thank you so much.